like something that's like, I'm bad, whereas guilt is, I've done something bad. And I think like getting away from this shame and understanding like you are a work in progress and you are, you know, constantly being able to change and shift your behaviors and the way that you interact with folks versus just like shutting yourself down and not discussing it and being afraid of it. Obviously, we don't change when we don't interact with these things that come up, right? And they do come up. They come up for everybody because we've all been trained to be like this. So I think to your point, you know, talking about it and having folks in your community that you can reach out to and be like, hey, like I did this. I need to unpack this with somebody, you know, and being able to be vulnerable with people in these conversations is like, it's really hard thing for white folks to do. It's really hard for a lot of people to be vulnerable, but particularly when the systems have been built for us completely, when we understand that we are complicit in these systems that are super horrific and obviously enable white supremacy, like it's a weird place to be in, to be able to talk to other people about it because you don't necessarily know where they're going to land on that spectrum. So finding people in your community that you can be vulnerable with and have those talks with is like a huge step in how we dismantle all of this.
Yeah. Jesse, do you want to start off with the white fragility stuff? And I'm so glad you mentioned the guilt and shame stuff because some of the things I want to talk today are about that because they're so linked to what it, like having come from colonizers. Guilt and shame is like currency of colonizers.
Did you have some, Eden?
Yeah, I was just gonna say if we could like backtrack just a little. I think we're just like ready to jump in, which is great. I just wanted to say hi to everybody who came. Thanks for coming. Thanks for logging on either again or if this is your first time. If it is your first time, I did want to mention that you can ask questions. Feel free to start dropping them into the Q&A. Now, if you ask them through the Q&A function, you'll see, like, we will see them as panelists, but other folks will not. And you can have the option to have your name attached or to do that anonymously as well. And then if you put anything into the chat, that will come up for everybody to be able to see. So that's a great place to like share resources and things like that. Do people want to reintroduce themselves at all in case anybody's new, or would that be just briefly?
Yeah, do a quick hello. I'm Ann Lewis. I'm an activist artist based in Detroit, and we're all doing this because we think it's really fucking important.
Okay.
My name is Kate DeCiccio. I'm an artist, educator, and cultural organizer. I live in Oakland, and it's been such a pleasure to hang out with some white people and talk about the work we got to do together.
You go next, Eden.
My name's Eden. I use their, she pronouns, and I am an organizer in Wayne County, which is in Michigan, and I have also been enjoying our chats.
I'm Jesse Hazelip. I'm a lifelong activist and artist, and been making work about this type of stuff for as long as I can remember. And I'm happy to be here along with you badasses. And so should I jump right into white fragility?
Yeah, so if you wanted to talk about a little bit about like the concept of white fragility, I think that term has been thrown around a lot, and then how that shows up on the ground or in like everyday interactions, that would be great.
Word. So everything that I talk about is based on just from my personal like observation pretty much. And I don't know much about like studies like into white fragility, but I do know observational stuff very thoroughly. And I've been seeing it within myself, especially in the last few weeks, because I've been a part of a group that is extremely active in the marches that are going down in Portland. And we've been providing this guardianship for these Black leaders, the Black leadership of a group here, and it's been really, really intense and scary, violent, and cars hitting us and weapons being drawn and the whole nine. So it's a very intense situation, and so I see a lot of white fragility popping up within that, but also just internally along, like white people getting extremely defensive over minor like things that shouldn't even be attention drawn to it. But what I noticed in myself was dealing with the guardianship, like that's a new role for me. I mean, not necessarily, but direct guardianship, because I've always gone to protests without intention of being there to help whoever needed help. But this is much more direct with assignments and so forth. But so now I know the people more thoroughly than I'm used to, and my help is not always welcome or wanted. And I found myself taking offense when my help wasn't welcome, and I would take it home and be emotional about it. Like this one night in particular, and I was like feeling kind of sorry for myself that night. It was actually the last Tuesday whenever I skipped out on the panel, which I apologize for, but it's a very emotional day and night for me, and I went home feeling sorry for myself. And when I woke up, I realized how ridiculous that feeling was, because I was going through very just selfish ideas in my mind of like what I expect and how I'm used to being treated. Because what I'm realizing is like white people are never used to criticism, especially publicly, or not being like praised for their help or idolized or just everything, you know? And now is a time that we need to smash that along with everything else. Like we have to realize that this state of being that we are accustomed to is directly because of white supremacy. And I'm just realizing how indoctrinated I am. Even though I've been fighting this since I was a child, I am still indoctrinated by white supremacy. So there's a lot that I have to internally tear down as I'm trying to physically tear it down as well. And it's scary to look at that even though I've been physically fighting this since I was a child, that it's still indoctrinated in me. It's scary to look at that and accept it, but we all have to accept it if we want to do this work. At some point, I want to develop a 12-step program for identifying white supremacy in yourself, because white people seem to really be drawn towards 12-step programs. But I also started seeing it within my group. I am associated with a really badass group of hardcore activists that are really putting their literal lives on the line. But I still see white fragility within those hardcore people, you know, because we're blind to white fragility. And unless we do some like deep internal introspection, we're not gonna advance anything. Like you can see it right now because people are so ready to just act like this didn't happen. You know, they put their Band-Aids on their social media and then they're like, okay, back to normal, back to like food pictures and selfies and what the fuck ever else. And like I'm heated. I shaved my fucking eyebrows off because I'm ready to fight, you know? Like we gotta keep this like fire going, you know? You know I'm pissed if my eyebrows come off. But I'll turn it over. Like that's my like spiel.
Um, I feel like so many things that you said are just so relevant to the things that I've been thinking about this week too, and kind of seeing like, okay, like in this right now, we're like at the top layer of the skin on the very top of the iceberg, and there's so much underneath. And how tragic would it be if we're like only dealing with like the very most top, wounds that we can see right now. Um and all the things that you just talked about are so relevant to something that I just see all the time, and something that also I've discovered about myself and my sense of myself in this work, and that so much of the way white people have been socialized, one, it's a super short-sighted view of how it is that we see ourselves. We're not socialized as a people. We're socialized as individuals. And one of the consequences of that in this moment is that it's really hard for us to walk into these situations and see the ways that we carry the harm of many, many, many generations of our people, because we don't take responsibility for the harm caused by our people. And, for me, some of the most transformational work that has helped me to feel like I can really step into this work from like the truest, most honest place is getting really, really honest and literate around who I come from, and really knowing, understanding the lies that have been built into the stories that we want to believe about ourselves, and the lies that America has told us about who it is that we are. And then, there's so many nuances to all of our different experiences. I'm a person who comes from 11 generations of Massachusetts colonizers. And in the work of two parts, in the work of doing the real digging to understand, the shit my people were part of. And that's like, I come from early settlers in Massachusetts who stole land from Native people, who participated in funding King Philip's War, which was like one of the bloodiest battles on soil here, slaughtering so many Indigenous women, children. I come from people who were here when colonizers were selling Indigenous people into slavery. And for sure my people are part of that, because I know where they were when it was happening. I come, and another thing that's like amazing about Puritan Pilgrim history is like they're meticulous motherfuckers. So like you can really dig in and like see what was happening. It was like, a guy I was related to, like in a neighborhood dispute, was part of ultimately causing the wife of his neighbor to be charged as a witch. And so we carry the unhealed harm of our ancestors. And if our ancestors haven't done the work to heal, and we're inheriting their wealth, we need to see the ways that we carry their harm, and also see what we've learned as a result of coming from that lineage. And I would say that, these things are different depending on where that you come from. But, when I've done the work to really get in my body and understand the ways of that I've carried being a person that comes from colonizers, the things that I have really noticed is all the ways that particularly like Protestant Christianity, it comes from a place of like what Anne was talking about, where shame and guilt are currency on behalf of subordination. And I grew up in New England where shame and guilt and ableism, right? This idea that you are here to work, and that your human value is based on your capacity to work. I had internalized all that stuff on a really deep, deep level, while also internalizing narratives around like, you came from Knights Pilgrims that were in friendly relationships with Native people, and you know, you come from humble, hardworking farmers. And so it was like this total contradiction of like how I felt was going on inside my body and these ideas that I'd internalized about who it is that we are. So when we think about this like white fragility stuff and like why does it feel so hurt that like I came to help and these people don't want my help? I think that if we can get into and like really knowing who it is that we are and what we come from, like the true about who we come from. And then also really getting into our bodies and doing the somatic work to see the ways that depending on who the lineage that we've come from, the ways that we've had to disconnect. And when I talk about disconnection, and I think that probably everyone will discover this on their own, I would just say that for you to be a slave owner, for you to be a person who engaged in domination and slaughter and exploitation of land, we have to have disconnected from our bodies in certain ways to be able to perpetrate that kind of violence, right? And so that numbness or the coping mechanisms that allow us to have that numbness, we carry that stuff unless we do the healing work on behalf of reconnection. So I think that one of the things that we need to be thinking about, in addition to like our new intellectual understanding, is this, what's the inner work that we need to do so that we can re-find ourselves in the larger order of things? Because as a white person, like I was saying, like when we have this super individual understanding of things and this individualistic idea of how we came to be and how we have the things that we have in our world, right? It's really hard for us to then think about what it means to be part of a larger humanity. But more, I would argue that one of the reasons why we're hurting so deeply is because we don't see ourselves as connected to the larger natural world. Whereas if we saw ourselves as part of and really felt in our bodies, if we felt that deep connection on a spiritual level, then we're not going to be suffering the sense of like deep alienation and loneliness and lack of identity, because we're going to be able to recognize that in the same way that, you know, that we are part of the wonder of all of the larger natural world, and that we can look to that space for guidance. So there's many layers here, but I think that as we're thinking about like what does it look like to dream towards a politic of possibility and regeneration and interdependence and resilience, we need to look backwards and see where we came from that has us psychologically and physically feeling so trapped in these feelings of like fragility, individualism, you know, colonized thinking. All that stuff owns us on a deep, deep level. And so we need to rewire ourselves on a deep, deep level.
100%. Yeah.
And that rewiring takes a lot of time, right? This isn't something that we can like do in an afternoon or a weekend or like go on a retreat and decolonize ourselves, or sit and listen to, you know, a bunch of white people talk about white fragility. Like this is something that we all have to do perpetually, right? And being able to, I think what, at least in my experience, what I see in white culture is that we are deeply disassociated from our own space in the world and how we show up in other spaces. And I think a lot of folks don't recognize like what you guys were saying before about like our presence can actually be harmful just being in a space. And like, that's really hard for people to understand. It's like, well, I didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't me. I didn't kill George Floyd, but it doesn't matter. And I think like that's a really hard thing for people to wrap their head around, just because it's like we're disassociated personally because of this rugged individualism concept of just like every person, every man for himself. And that's just been ingrained in like the American psyche for so long that people don't recognize that we contribute every single day and we benefit from white supremacy just in the social structure and fabric of our nation. So I think, you know, again, speaking to Kate's point, like how do we actually participate in healing this, you know? And it's like that to me is what I'm really curious and interested in right now is like, how do I participate in unraveling this? And while I think these talks are good, I also think like it needs to sort of be done on an individual personal level with personal reflection, meditation, writing, you know, like reading. Obviously educating yourself is a huge part of this, but it's also just like personal reflection and like, okay, how am I participating in this? How can I, you know, really shift things into a different space? And Jesse, to your 12-step program, I like that because the 12-step program to me, like I immediately associate like 12 with cops.
Yeah.
Being like,
I love that.
colonize your brain from.
Maybe we'll have it at 13-step program.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was debating. I was like, is it better as 12 or 13? But yeah.
13
maybe
program.
we should do some questions.
Well, real quick, can I
Yeah.
jump in real quick? Sorry. I talked about how I noticed my white fragility, but I didn't talk about what I did the next day to, like, I when I woke up, I was like, okay, shut the fuck up, Jesse, and do better. And, you know, don't expect anybody else to do anything different. Like, what can I do differently today to make up for being a fragile white little like wimp last night? And that the next day, I tried my best just to like do better, and it worked. Like I went out of my way, like with people that like, because I'm an intimidating presence. I'm very tall, and I'm covered in all black and body armor, and so I went and I just showed my face and smiled, and I was just like introduced myself to people, and I'm just like, hey, like this is who I am. Like I'm not a threat, like. But I also was very aware of my space to make sure it was welcome in the first place. So be aware of the space that you are occupying, and be aware as if your presence is welcome. And then I went out of my way, and it was such a good day because I took the initiative to make change, and I bridged some like really important gaps that day by just being accountable and telling myself to shut the fuck up and do better. And so yeah, that's my what's what I did.
Thanks everybody. Do we sort of like dabbled in this a little bit, but do we want to address this question of like talking about what are some of the mistakes that we've made? I know Jesse, you kind of talked a lot about that, but Kate or Anne?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think definitely as activists in this space, it's really easy to feel like we need to amplify our own voices or like make work about this or be, you know, like reflecting on this. And artists center themselves all the time. That's like part of being an artist, which I hate. And I really try not to ever talk about my own life with my work. But I think to that end, you know, I speak to social issues that maybe, you know, is my perception valid, needed, worthy of being, you know, amplified? You know, like I think it's very easy for folks in this space as activist artists to be like, okay, well, we need to talk about this, but then it becomes about the artist, and I always kind of retreat in those spaces. But I think, you know, fumbling through that right now, like how do we address this topic and make work, and then also, you know, is it our time to make work about this? Maybe it's just about making space for other people to make work about this. And so I've been really kind of struggling with how do I show up, but not like take not the takeover, because that's not obviously the point, but just like, how do you exist in that space, but still obviously, use your talents, right? But not necessarily be at the attention.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot. And I've thought about that a lot where, the content of my work for a long time has been stuff based in abolition. And particularly since 2014, I've painted portraits of parents who the cops have murdered their kids. And always in doing that work, there was frustration around, like, a lot of times when that work would get attention, people wanted to talk, like, to me about it. And obviously the work was created to recenter the narrative, to be a counter narrative around of course, the larger issue of police terror and who should be telling that story. But now, I think a lot about, so often it's like a classic, again, sort of that kind of like white paternalism and that white like heroism, like run towards the fire to sit. We want to run into spaces where we can be heroes and where we can like tell stories of hardship, like that we're helping. And I think that at times I've gotten caught in that trap where, like, I talk about the issue that's the problem when I should be claiming my part of the problem. Because the narratives that we're not hearing is like this is the ways in which white parents have acted to make sure that Black parents' kids are getting murdered. This is how, as a white woman, as an artist, what would it look like if I was talking about the ways in which me as a white woman has a completely different experience in the world, and that experience is part of what's causing the cops to be able to murder people. Another way I would say that is like a mistake that I definitely made, mostly when I was, like early, like right out of college, and what happens a lot when you're like young and white, and I've been reading a lot about this week too, is like just about the nonprofit industrial complex and how that works, and like how that came to be, and that so much of that sector was created so that white people who didn't need the services could have full-time jobs. And, when I was in my early 20s, I definitely worked in spaces where it was completely inappropriate for me to be there. And I believed that, I was doing good work and that I was contributing in this kind of way. And in many ways, what I was doing was, completely robbing the kids that were being served, because they were being served poorly by a person who wasn't from their community. And yeah, I'm fine. Like, the pedagogy of the way that I did that work, like, I don't have an ethical problem with now. But when I think about, what it means for like 23-year-old white people to have fellowships in nonprofits in neighborhoods where the entire nonprofit serves Black children, and the kind of trauma that those kids had and the support that they needed, it was not anything that I could have, served them. Like, there was just nothing, I had nothing to offer to them that was meaningful. And so, yeah, my presence was a huge mistake, but yeah.
Yeah. You had something? Sorry.
No, that was a good segue into a different question, but you can go ahead.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about some of my, I think it ties in, is that what I've been noticing within my group dynamic of the people I'm working with is that it's a big group. It is like multiracial and biracial and intersectional, but the voices that I see are the most comfortable are all the white voices. And that's because we're guaranteed a platform and not questioned when we're on our platform, ever. It's just, we're guaranteed, like, so I can speak like this, like, easily, because it just like was given to me without having to work for it, and that I just noticed that with like this big group of folks, like, and that's where the white fragility comes in, because whenever they get any kind of like flack for what has been said, there's all of a sudden all the defenses go up, all the like alarms, because they're not used to being taken off of their platform or checked.
Yeah.
But then I'm also observing a lot of the non-white members are extremely reluctant to speak in front of the crowd because they've never been given that position before. Like, I'm assuming, I can't speak for them, but it's just palpable that there's a difference. And so I think right now is like a time when we see that to try to amplify those voices around us, and to reach out and be like, do you want, like, what do you have to say? You know, like, I've been trying to do that within my own group of just like stepping to the side when I see somebody I can tell wants to say something, and not say it for them, but give them an ear that they can say it to, you know? And then on all of our social media, like, right now is a time to amplify Black voices. And that's a really easy thing for us to do. But we also have to be ethical in that, because in preparation for today, I reached out to some friends, and one of my friends was scared to be amplified because of being attacked by white supremacy. And so it's a very fragile time, and I think everybody needs to really be checking themselves and checking in on their intentions. Because I spoke to another friend, and she had to cut off this white girl that was pretty much tokenizing her and using her images and videos without her permission. And she was like, what the fuck are you doing? I asked you not to do this. So, like, we have to be very aware of everything that we're doing right now, especially right now. But I don't know the right answer to that. Like, we do need to be amplifying Black voices, but we also have to be extremely responsible in the way that we're going about it.
So to that point, we all reached out to Black artists this week to see if they were interested in being amplified through this discussion. And so I've got a list that I'll put in the chat. There are some, most of them are Instagram handles. There are websites to a few folks as well, because I know there's some people on here who aren't on Instagram. But again, like, to Jesse's point, and I think this wasn't something that I even considered. I was just like, oh, cool, yeah, you know, like, let's share people's handles and get people paying attention to these really important voices. But yeah, if people aren't comfortable with that, like, we need to be really considering, like, as white people, we just do shit, right? Like, we just think like, oh yeah, like, this is great, everybody's gonna love this because I think it's great, without recognizing, like, this could actually cause harm. So it's really important. And this is something that I've been doing the last couple of weeks on everything, but maybe not this one, because I think Kate or Jesse were like, hey, oh, it was Jesse. You know, we need to stop it and, like, think about it for a second, and like, consider, like, could this possibly cause harm? If so, like, let's fucking just check in with people. Like, just ask them, ask their permission. People are going to be stoked, and if they're not, then we know better, you know? But I think, yeah, white folks have to fucking take a breather and think about what we're doing before we, like, just go and roll with whatever we think is best. Because, again, like, that's white patriarchal structures, right? Of, like, paternalism, of just, like, somebody thinking that they know what's best for a given circumstance without actually checking in with anybody. I think that's stuff that we just need to not be doing without really spending a moment and considering the ramifications of our actions.
Yeah. And I think also we have so many blind spots, but, you know, have been taught to, like, not see them and just charge forward with such confidence, that something that's, you know, really humbling. And also, you know, part of relationship building is that, you know, especially when you're collaborating with or working together with non-white people, you know, before you charge forward with things that you think are a great idea, just check with people. Like, hey, I think this seems awesome, but, like, are there fucked up things that me as a white lady, like, doesn't realize? And sometimes there's not, and they're like, this is sweet. And sometimes you're like, no, dude, this is a terrible idea, and here's all the reasons why. But getting into that practice with people also, you know, it makes you a safe person for you to open the door to being like, yo, I know that sometimes, like, I have on white blinders, but please tell me because I want to know. Then you're making it safer for people to be like, hey, you have on white blinders, but you didn't notice. And then you can just be like, oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that also speaks to consent too, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, informed consent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Consent is something that most of us were not taught, especially men of my generation. And I think moving forward, like, consent needs to be on all levels, you know, especially whenever, because there's legitimate threats out there, and they're just rearing their ugly heads right now. Like, there's been multiple accounts of white supremacists, like, following home Black and brown people from marches and threatening them. And it's not even, like, making the news. Like, nothing is making the news now. It's crazy. They're over capacity of insanity right now, and it's really intense.
Absolutely. I think, like, the context in which we use the word consent needs to be a lot broader. We should be, like, understanding consensual conversations, and not just like a lot of times it's used around sex, right? And that's important, obviously, but it's not the only context where that's relevant or important. So I'm really glad that we brought that up, and to know that, like, that conversation sometimes will be awkward, and that's okay. It's safer to have an awkward conversation than to assume. But yeah, Kate, you were kind of talking about this a little bit, but we can circle back to it. Someone asked, can one do anything positive from inside a problematic organization? For example, a nonprofit with a director who is racist.
First of all, I think one of the things that is a good place to start is whenever there's a perceived when there's a sort of social contract within an organization that all it is that we're doing is good, interrogating that is a really healthy practice. Also, something that, I don't know, do we share here the qualities of white supremacy culture? Have we shared that document? No? Okay, we can share it after this, but there's a really great list, and it's like the qualities of white supremacist culture that are normalized in professional settings. And so I would say that, you know, now is a great time for you to show up with materials that are like, hey, these are some of the things that are often normalized in settings like ours, and they maintain white supremacy culture. Let's dig into what this looks like. And because likely if you have a director who is racist, they're not going to be in a space where they're going to respond to you just claiming that they're racist. But if we're like, here's the things that are qualities of a racist space, let's look at them. I mean, and again, just back to that kind of thing where, like, all of us need to do this work on our own. None of us are going to, like, highlight for someone else like a huge discovery. This is work that we need to synthesize and really just kind of digest on our own and discover truth on our own. Otherwise, it's just not going to be real transformation. So as much as we can do that, but then again, like, if you have an explicitly racist person who's enacting harm in your organization, I think it's also your responsibility to go to the board. And I have been in those kinds of situations where you've got a really toxic director and they're causing harm, like a toxic white director causing harm on, you know, Black subordinates. I've totally gone to the board before and been like, look, this is what's happening. I won't work here if this is what's going on. And these are all the ways that I've seen racism enacted from this person in a leadership position. So yeah, I would say positive, hold the board accountable for what their mission statement is, in deep, meaningful ways.
I do the wording on that is funny, the qualities, because there are no qualities to white supremacy. I wish there was like
It's funny, it's quality. Yeah.
yeah, the symptoms of the disease of white supremacy. Like, I think that even like white supremacy like implies like, I hope that we can all just start like changing the vernacular around this. Like, there is no supremacy associated with white, you know, and there is no qualities associated with that. I mean, that's just me being like an asshole, I guess.
No, I like it. It's true though. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This is the time where we need to be changing how we understand things by changing language, right? So instead of white supremacy, you can replace that with white nationalism. I still don't think that quite gets to the meat of this, but I've been trying very hard to stop saying white supremacy because
Terrorism is good too.
Yeah. Is the image that you guys are talking about, is it blue with a bunch of black text? Kate, is that the one you're talking about? For the white supremacy, elements of white nationalism. Is it an infographic that you were
it's a document.
Well, we'll put it in the newsletter for those of you who open the newsletter. It'll be there. Yeah, Eden, you wanna?
Yeah. So here's kind of switching gears a little bit here on the topic of amplifying Black voices. It sometimes feels like I'm co-opting Black voices to support my own narrative, and it feels like my white social media community is also cherry picking to support their views. How do we amplify Black voices without running it through our own white filter?
Take this from Black people who have amplified Black people. There's no filter. You're just taking other people's stuff and amplifying that. I think part of what we've been doing with sharing resources in this group is sharing resources developed by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, because again, we're not experts, right? So finding those folks who've already done this work through their own lens is way more important than any of us like deciding what's worth reading and not worth reading or doing.
Yeah, I think it's a good time for everybody to check ego and intention too, because if you find what you're doing is ego based, it's the wrong intention. And I think that it sounds simple, but it's a very deep dive into your entire being, and see what it's feeding. Like, what inside of yourself are you feeding? Are you feeding your ego, or are you feeding like your goals to correct your morals and actually, because our egos are directly associated with white supremacy, you know, and that's a hard one, and it's also hard to identify within ourselves. It took me a really long time to try to tear down my own ego and uplift other voices, because my entire career is based around my name, you know, and my art associated with my name. And so I had to like really see, like, no, this isn't my place to be talking about this, but I can use this platform to uplift other voices with my platform. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that's my take.
I think also to like really interrogate, how do we like to like interrogate where it's coming from, why am I sharing this resource, but also be ready to be interrogated. That's one thing that I noticed myself doing, especially if we're kind of going back to that question of like mistakes that you've made, is that I was like ready to just like instantly share things, but then when I would get questioned on those things, even though I would agree with them, I hadn't spent enough time in reflection and researching to have a good answer for people who are now looking to me to ask these questions to, and that is doing a disservice. So one thing I've noticed myself doing now is being really critical of like, like, what is it that I'm sharing, and can I answer somebody's questions about this? Have I spent enough time to speak about this with my community members? So that's one thing that I've kind of been doing as far as like amplifying Black voices goes.
Speaking of conversations, did you get that document that I shared, the one that's how to talk to people?
You didn't put it in the chat.
I sent it to her email. Here, I can find it. Oh, good.
While Kate's doing that, I think to Eden's point, I think, we try to do these things very fast, and like why we're sharing these things, going back to the ego and the discussion, but also like capitalism has forced everybody to do everything very quickly without thinking about it, right? Because like our time is valuable and time is money, and you don't want to, we have no idea how to think slowly and act slowly anymore. We just spend all of the time like trying to do as much as we can, and oftentimes it's very misguided. So I think to your point, just taking an extra step or two, really considering why you're doing it, how you're doing it, who are you speaking to, who are you speaking about, the who, what, why, where, when kind of questions before you, send an email, share something, post something.
I'm close, but you guys should go on to the next question. I'm here, I'm listening. I'm right here.
Okay. So there was, I love this question. What is your opinion about outing openly racist social media posts from racist folks to their employers by sending things like screenshots or links? Anybody want to take that?
Do it all.
Burn them down.
Yeah, there's really if they're posting it on social media, that's public space, right? So why hold back? I do feel like if it's overtly aggressive racism, yes, call them out. If it's something that somebody is unknowingly doing and you care about them, reach out to them personally. But if you think that they're like, they've got KKK tattooed on their bodies, like, expose those motherfuckers. But if it's, something that's like, maybe they're unaware and maybe you think that they need some education, everything's a spectrum, but I would err on the side of outing them. But it is a case by case circumstance, right? Like, you don't want to ruin somebody's life because they didn't realize that they were being racist. They need to do a lot of work. I don't know. Again, I think it depends on how horrific the post is. But if it's horrific, yeah.
I would think about in extreme cases about your own safety too, because if you're dealing with like an actual Aryan Nation member or something, like those are very actually dangerous groups. My brother was targeted by the Aryan Nation, and they got my mom's number like somehow, and her social security number, her address, and like they were like actively calling and sending death threats. And when my mom contacted the police were like, well, we can't do anything, but you should take this seriously and arm yourselves. So be like careful, but also be vigilant, because we can't be intimidated and give up this fight. Like I expect every day I go out to be arrested or die. So just check in with like how down you are for the cause too. Like we have to really fight this all hands on deck, all until we tear it down.
To that point too, I think it's really important to make sure that we are practicing really strong digital security, cybersecurity stuff. Like, make sure you don't have the same password for the same, for everything. Like, use like encrypted password things like 1Password and that sort of stuff. And on social media, don't like geotag yourself at your house. Like, there's so many things that people do or like they'll post like their run maps. Like, don't do that. Don't put that kind of information out there. There's zero reason you need to do it. And going back to like white fragility and like needing likes and needing dopamine hits for all of the things, like don't do that. Like focus on other things, but like really start considering if you're going to be part of this conversation and you're going to start make risky moves like outing somebody to their employer, like you need to make sure that your stuff is like secure. So you're not to your mom.
Yeah.
Like if these effects will then hit on your family, like you really need to recognize like you got to really, secure things before you do something.
Yeah. And there are people down to dox people, like on Twitter, you can find like people or groups that actively dox white supremacists, and they have a whole squad that's down to go do that, And as far as like sharing stuff, like I've been like actively on the streets for weeks now, but like you don't see that on my social media because like I don't want to be on blast like that, and I also don't want to put like my comrades on blast, because I don't want to incriminate anybody. But people need to be documenting police violence and these white supremacists attacking us. Like we've been hit by multiple vehicles. Luckily, some of them were caught on video, but that's the instances where I feel like we need to be documenting.
Kate, did you want to speak at all about the link that you shared, or were you distracted?
Oh yeah, so I know that one thing that I've noticed throughout all of these is that people are asking a lot of questions about like, but what about when my parents say this, or like I have to go to have Thanksgiving with my family So this is this amazing document that I got this week, and I don't want to call it a silver bullet for talking to your family, but it is an incredible resource. Mostly because it's just loaded with resources, and it's built as though you're having all the hard conversations with your family and or the people that you went to high school with who want to battle you on Facebook.
I do want to ask the audience if you guys would be interested if we started structuring the talks so we focused on like one or two specific topics in depth each week, or if it's more helpful for you guys to send in questions each time. But I feel like if you're given like a specific topic like housing and gentrification, or defunding the police and what does that look like, microaggressions, what does that mean, and how do I see how that works? I'm wondering if that would be more helpful for everybody so that people can come with questions and we can have resources ready for you guys around those topics specifically, because I feel like sometimes the questions get asked and we're like, yeah, and then we're scrambling to find resources, and again, about spending time and space and really thinking things through before we're sharing resources and that sort of thing. So if you guys want to throw a note in the chat and just let us know your thoughts on that, that would be helpful.
Yeah. And if there's specific themes that you can think of off the top of your head, that would also be great. Like, is there stuff you really want to go in on that we kind of haven't really been able to?
Real quick on the questions about like, well, what do I say to this racist family member or this racist person in my life or that? I think that really opens up the conversation that you need to have with yourself is like, why don't you know what to say to your racist grandmother? That means that you need to educate yourself more on racism so you can combat it whenever you see it. Because if I have a racist family member that presents himself to me, I know exactly what to say to them. I know exactly how to combat racist dialogue or racist ideals. That's because I've been educating myself my entire life about it. I can speak easily on things that I'm informed on, and so I think that those questions show that those people need to do more work themselves to be able to show their grandmother, because like that means that you don't know how to combat racism in yourself, because you can't articulate to somebody like, hey, that's fucked up and this is why that's fucked up, you know.
Yeah, articulation on these topics, you know, as white people, I think a lot of folks this is like the white side of this conversation, right? Like, you don't know what to say, so you don't say anything at all, and then it's therefore harmful or more harmful than if you attempted. And I think we also just need to get comfortable with like attempting to talk about this and learning as we go. You know, you're going to continue to read things and become educated, and you have to do that work, but you also have to not be scared to have these conversations and just like recognize like your moral truth should be guiding you through those conversations. And if it's not, you got to keep reading.
Right, and I think that it's also couched in, you know, parts of white socialization that are coded as though it's like politeness or manners to like not cause a big stir, and that is really serve white supremacy in white ways. Like if we have everyone thinking that like they're being rude if they bring things up, then we can make sure not to disrupt any systems. So again, like along those lines of what I was talking about a couple weeks about, of how, you know, it's truly our responsibility to portray our whiteness. Your politeness is part of your whiteness. So, yeah.
Portray the politeness. It's good.
It looks like we have a lot of support for doing more focused topics in the chat, which is great. I see a couple suggestions, but maybe we can do something like send out a poll or something like that to get some feedback. But I did want to say that, like, no matter what topic we come with, again, just like we've said from the beginning, we're not coming at as like experts in any way. It just is allowing for us to give more consideration to the resources that we're bringing and more thought to the questions that are being asked ahead of time. And also we could encourage you to do that as audience members as well. Like what have you been reading about this topic, right? So I did want to mention that as well. And thanks so much for everyone who's dropping some suggestions in here. And
yeah,
let's give out some homework too to our viewers. Let's say, go buy that book.
And then go buy this one.
Yeah, and also research a local Black-owned business that you can support and go support it this week.
Quick question from Wendy. Are videos of past meetings available online? Yes, and sends out a newsletter. We actually have a YouTube channel that we upload the videos to after each session. So
I also want to tell you that some people have been telling me they haven't been getting the newsletter, but then when I direct them to their spam, it's there. So if you can't find the newsletter, check out your spam.
Yeah, that would explain the open rate. Check your spam and then open it and read it.
Yeah. The person who just asked, how can we sign up for the newsletter? If you put your email into the sign up, whatever email you put in to like sign up to get this link, that's where the newsletter will be going.
Sari, I think you're on the newsletter.
And I think I'm not on the newsletter yet.
Yes, you're on the newsletter. You just
Am
also have your spam.
It's probably in your spam, just like mine.
I'm the worst analyst.
It takes me to have it.
I get worst employee of the month, like for sure. Sorry.
I'm just
to chat here.
Yeah, I'm just making a quick link to book. One of them.
I'm also going to put together a list of like, what are like some old school anti-racist abolition books that aren't sold out right now? Because I feel like right now there's like the top 5, the anti-racist books that have all come out in the last 10-ish years. But people have been speaking abolition, anti-racism for way longer. So I'll put some of those books on the list for next week.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we don't want to keep you all past 9, so thank you so much for coming. Thank you for continuing to do this work, and We will see you next week. I will throw in the newsletters the topic that we picked for next week. So open it and then get your questions ready for that. Well,
Stay on the streets.
yeah, exactly. All right,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Love you all.
Yeah, we believe in you. You're gonna burn it all down and know it.